Winter in Boston brings early darkness. Looking out from the hospital room window, the twilight sky was already turning a deep purple. Judith Walker lay in her hospital bed, absently flipping through a magazine. Known as a sharp editor at iTruth Publishing, she now had both legs in casts and winced with pain in her ribs whenever she moved. Still reading? That's not good for your eyes, her mother Martha said as she entered the room. As co-owner of a high-end real estate company in the Boston suburbs, Martha always maintained a perfect appearance. Today she wore an expensive tweed suit with a pearl necklace, looking out of place in the simple hospital room. "It's work manuscripts, Mom," Judith replied quietly. "I can't just lie here all day. Just like you, always working." "But I didn't come to talk about work, I'm here to discuss Lauren's wedding." Harold, Judith's father, followed Martha into the room. He had been a successful lawyer and still served as counsel for a major law firm. His posture was always dignified, and he never showed a soft expression to his daughters. "I heard from the doctor. You can leave the hospital in 2 weeks, Harold said, getting straight to the point without much of a greeting. Judith sighed softly. "Yes, but it will take months for a full recovery. I'll need rehabilitation too." "That's good enough," Harold nodded. "Lauren's wedding is in 3 weeks. You'll make it in time." Judith stared at her parents in surprise. "You must be joking? I'll still need a wheelchair. I have a serious concussion, and it's painful to sit for long periods." "But dear, it's your sister's special day." Martha raised her voice. "It's your duty as family. You should celebrate with her." "I want to celebrate with her too. But my doctor said I need at least 6 weeks of rest." Harold snorted. "A broken bone is just an excuse for weakness. When I was young, I went back to work on crutches the day after breaking my leg." Judith silently stared at the ceiling. Conversations with her parents always followed this pattern. When it came to Lauren, even rational judgment went out the window. Lauren had been the family favorite since childhood. Beautiful and sociable, she was always the center of attention during her school years. Now she was a lawyer at a prestigious firm, engaged to Bradley Harrison, the son of a prominent Chicago family. For her parents, this marriage was a dream come true. "Bradley's family has strong connections in political and financial circles," Martha said eagerly as she sat down. "The wedding will be attended by at least 2 senators and a governor. It would look terrible if you weren't there." "I think health is more important than appearances," Judith quietly resisted. "Listen, Judith," Harold leaned forward. "You've always insisted on doing things your way. In college, at work, you've always put yourself before family. But this time is different. This is the most important day of Lauren's life. Your inconvenience is no excuse." Judith closed her eyes. 2 weeks ago, she was returning from an important publishing meeting when a car ran a red light and crashed into her vehicle while she was stopped. When she regained consciousness, she was lying in a hospital bed, diagnosed with fractures in both legs, multiple broken ribs, and a concussion. The police were still looking for the driver who had fled the scene. "Fine," Judith finally conceded. "I'll do what I can. But I'll need my doctor's permission." Martha's face brightened. "That's my girl. Of course, try not to stand out too much during the ceremony. A wheelchair would look odd in the photos. And," Harold added, "prepare a speech for the day. Make sure it pleases Bradley's parents." Judith said nothing. Looking out at the darkening sky, she wondered when her life had become so distorted. Since childhood, her parents had always prioritized Lauren, telling Judith to be strong and be independent. Somehow she had become a perfectionist, seeking her parents' love through career success. But now, in this hospital room, she suddenly realized how tired she was. After her parents left, silence filled the room. Soon, a nurse named Becky came in and smiled kindly. "Are you okay? I saw your parents were here." "Yes," Judith gave a wry smile. "I'm fine. I just need to figure out how to attend my sister's wedding." Becky frowned. "But in your condition." "I don't have a choice," Judith said quietly. "It's family." On the wedding day, a wheelchair waited in the hospital hallway. Judith sat on the edge of the bed, catching her breath as she looked at the dress nurse Becky had brought. It was a lovely navy blue, but it would be difficult to put on with her casts. "Are you really going?" Becky asked worriedly. Dr. Simons was against it. "I don't have a choice," Judith answered quietly. "My father is coming to pick me up." Becky bit her lip in disapproval but said nothing more. She helped Judith dress and supported her as she moved to the wheelchair. "Does it hurt?" Becky asked, and Judith nodded slightly. "I'm fine. I took pain medication." But she still winced with every movement. As the nurse was fixing her hair, Harold Walker entered the room. He was wearing an expensive gray suit and looking at his watch with irritation. "We're going to be late. Are you ready?" Becky frowned. "Mr. Walker, your daughter is severely injured. She needs to move slowly." "I didn't ask for your opinion," Harold said coldly, grabbing the wheelchair handles. "Let's go, Judith." They took the hospital elevator down and headed for the parking lot. Harold handled the wheelchair roughly, showing frustration when the wheels caught on bumps. "That hurts, Dad." Judith cried out. "Can't you be a little gentler?" Harold frowned. "You're making too much of a fuss over broken bones. This is the most important day of your sister's life. Show some endurance." When they reached the parking lot, Harold tried to move Judith into the passenger seat. She grimaced in pain but managed to slide into the seat. Her leg casts made it difficult to close the door. "Hurry up," Harold said as he sat in the driver's seat. "It's already an hour before the ceremony. We can't be late because of you." Judith looked out the window and endured in silence. The car drove toward downtown, where the luxury hotels stood. "Lauren has been nervous since this morning," Harold said as he drove. "She'll be happy to see you. She's always said she respects you as her sister." Judith gave a small, bitter smile. She had never heard that her sister respected her. Lauren had always enjoyed their parents' favoritism and saw Judith only as a competitor. "Martha is waiting at the hotel," Harold continued. "They've arranged a wheelchair at the entrance to the venue. But don't attract too much attention. Today is Lauren's day." "I understand," Judith answered quietly. When they arrived at the hotel, staff met them and prepared a wheelchair. However, there were small steps at the entrance to the venue, with no ramp. "How do I get up there?" Judith asked, and Harold shrugged. "Figure it out yourself," he said, and walked in ahead of her. Judith was left behind, dumbfounded. As she sat there at a loss, a stranger approached. "May I help you?" She turned to see a man with a warm smile. He resembled Bradley but had a gentler air about him. "Thank you," Judith smiled. "But I'm heavy." "That's all right," the man took hold of the wheelchair and carefully carried it up the steps. "I'm Michael Harrison, Bradley's cousin." "Judith Walker. The bride's sister." "I've heard about you," Michael said as he pushed the wheelchair into the venue. "But I wasn't told you were in this condition. What were your family thinking, making you come like this?" Judith could only give a wry smile. "It's family duty, you know." The venue was already crowded with guests. The grand hall was beautifully decorated, filled with members of Chicago and Boston high society. As Judith entered in her wheelchair, glances turned her way, with whispers of sympathy and surprise spreading through the crowd. Martha hurried over, her expression tense. Judith, why are you so late? Everyone is staring. Couldn't you stay more in the corner? Mom, I'm Lauren's sister. I have the right to sit with the family, Judith answered quietly but firmly. Martha looked around anxiously. But I'll guide her, Mrs. Walker, Michael intervened. At the edge of the family section, she won't be in the way. Martha nodded reluctantly, and Michael guided Judith to the family seating area at the front. As the ceremony began, Bradley took his place at the altar, and Lauren entered on her father's arm. She was dressed in a pure white wedding gown, the perfect image of a bride. The ceremony proceeded solemnly, and Judith maintained her smile despite the pain. Lauren exchanged vows with Bradley, and when they were pronounced husband and wife, applause erupted from the audience. The reception was held in another hall of the same hotel. As guests chatted with champagne in hand, Judith was helped to her seat by Michael. Can I get you something to drink? Michael asked kindly. Thank you, but I can't have alcohol with my medication. Could you get me some water? While Michael went to get drinks, the master of ceremonies stood in the center of the room with a microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, while you enjoy your meal, we'll hear some congratulatory words for the newlyweds. First, the groom's father gave a speech, followed by friends who offered humorous tributes. Judith listened quietly. And now, a toast from the bride's sister, Judith Walker. Suddenly, the MC called her name. Judith looked around in surprise. No one had asked her to make a speech. Martha and Harold also looked visibly disturbed as they stared at her. As the room fell silent, Michael pushed her wheelchair to the center. Judith took a deep breath and accepted the microphone. All eyes in the venue were on Judith. She held the microphone with trembling hands and momentarily felt the urge to flee. But then Michael gently placed his hand on her shoulder, nodding slightly to encourage her. Judith took a deep breath and began to speak. Hello, everyone. I'm surprised by this sudden request for a speech, she said in a nervous voice. Actually, I'm still hospitalized from a traffic accident 2 weeks ago, but I came for my sister's special day. I was taught by my parents that family celebrates together, no matter the circumstances. At these words, applause of sympathy and admiration rose from the guests. Judith glanced at her parents. Martha was smiling, but her eyes were cold. My sister Lauren has always shined since childhood, Judith continued. Her talent and beauty have always been the pride of our family. And today, she has found a wonderful partner in Bradley. Lauren was smiling next to Bradley, but Judith could sense her expression gradually changing. As her sister's speech drew the attention of the room, with guests clearly moved by Judith's courage, jealousy began to appear in Lauren's eyes. Bradley, you are a wonderful man. Please take care of my sister. And Lauren. Judith's voice caught for a moment. I want you to be happy. As your family, as your sister, I sincerely bless your new life. When the speech ended, loud applause erupted from the audience. Several guests stood up to show respect for Judith's courage. Barbara, Bradley's mother, smiled at her while wiping away tears. As Michael pushed the wheelchair back to her seat, Lauren suddenly blocked their path. Her face was red with anger. Judith, Lauren said in a low voice. We need to talk. Lauren led them to a less crowded hallway. Bradley followed his wife with a confused expression, but Michael didn't leave Judith's wheelchair. You did that on purpose. Lauren exploded as soon as they reached the hallway. Drawing attention at my wedding. I didn't know you were in such a condition, everyone's worrying about you instead of focusing on me. Judith was stunned by her sister's sudden attack. What are you talking about? I was just congratulating you. Don't lie. Lauren's voice grew louder, causing nearby guests to turn. You've ruined my perfect day. It's always been like this, ever since we were children, you trying to steal my spotlight. Bradley placed his hand on his wife's shoulder, saying, "Lauren, calm down. Everyone's watching," but Lauren shook off his hand. "This doesn't concern you. This is between me and my sister." At that moment, Michael took out his smartphone. "Excuse me, but I think this needs to be recorded," he said calmly. Lauren's eyes widened in fear. What are you doing?" "Collecting evidence," Michael replied quietly. "Actually, I'm a lawyer specializing in traffic accidents. And recently, I received some interesting information about a particular accident." The venue suddenly fell silent. Even Judith was confused, looking between Michael and her sister. "What do you mean?" Bradley asked in confusion. Michael took a deep breath and began to explain. 2 weeks ago, I was working late at my downtown office. On my way home, I witnessed a major traffic accident. Judith's heart began to race. Michael was talking about her accident. A car that was stopped at a red light was hit by another vehicle speeding through. "I remembered the license plate and reported it to the police," Michael continued. "And yesterday, I discovered that a car with that license plate was being repaired in a garage owned by Bradley's family." The color drained from Lauren's face. She brought a trembling hand to her mouth. "What does that have to do with anything?" Martha intervened. She and Harold had also gathered in the hallway. "What are you implying?" "What I'm saying," Michael said, still holding his smartphone, "is that the car was driven by Lauren Walker. And after causing the accident, she fled." A murmur went through the crowd. Bradley stepped away from Lauren. "Is this true?" Lauren opened her mouth but couldn't speak. Instead, Harold stepped forward. "This is ridiculous," he said with an authoritative voice. "Accusing my daughter without evidence." "I have evidence," Michael replied calmly. "Records showing this car was brought to a repair shop under Lauren's name right after the accident. And cell phone location data placing her at that location at that time." Judith was trembling. "Lauren, is it true?" After a long silence, Lauren began to cry. "I caused the accident, but it wasn't intentional. I saw my sister at that intersection and was trying to talk to her." Judith asked in a shaking voice, "Why didn't you stop? Why didn't you call an ambulance?" Lauren answered through tears, "I panicked, and I was afraid it would ruin my marriage to Bradley." The venue was enveloped in complete silence. Bradley slowly began to remove his wedding ring. "I can't believe it," he said, his voice shaking. "We just exchanged vows, and you abandoned your seriously injured sister and ran away." "No." Lauren desperately pleaded. I. But her words rang hollow. Bradley's father stepped forward and instructed security, "Call the police." Martha and Harold stood speechless, stunned. For years, they had favored Lauren and listened only to her side. And now, they were watching everything crumble before their eyes. "Judith," Michael quietly addressed her. "Let me help you prepare compensation claims for your injuries and the emotional distress you've suffered." As police officers appeared at the entrance, Judith realized her emotions were a complex mix. Anger, sadness, the pain of betrayal, and a strange sense of liberation. For years, she had been told to be strong while being neglected within her family. And now, the truth was revealed, breaking the long silence. As she watched Lauren being escorted away by police, Judith squeezed Michael's hand. "What happens now?" she asked in a small voice. "Justice will be done," Michael answered quietly. "And you will heal. Not just physically, but emotionally too." An ambulance was called, and Judith had to return to the hospital. But this time, she wasn't alone. Michael stayed by her side, and Barbara, Bradley's mother, held her hand with concern. To think you came from the hospital against medical advice. Lauren and your parents never mentioned anything. To be treated this way. Barbara said in a voice mixing anger and sympathy. Judith gazed out the window, quietly contemplating. Her life had changed dramatically today. Years of family dysfunction had been exposed at once, and new relationships were beginning to form. As the ambulance siren wailed and they left the hotel, Judith thought for the first time, now, I might truly become free. Staring at the white ceiling of the hospital, Judith reflected on recent events. The wedding had been cancelled, Lauren arrested, and her life completely transformed. Morning sunlight gently illuminated her room through the window. Breakfast time, Nurse Becky entered cheerfully. Oatmeal and fruit today. And you have quite a few visitors waiting. Visitors? Judith raised herself in surprise. Who? First, the Harrison family, Becky answered while setting down the tray. Especially that handsome lawyer, he's been waiting in the hallway since yesterday. Judith felt her cheeks warm. Michael Harrison had accompanied her in the ambulance to the hospital yesterday. After breakfast, Barbara entered with a bouquet. How are you feeling? Better than yesterday, Judith smiled. But it still hurts when I move. Barbara sat down and said earnestly, is there anything we can do for you? Bradley's father and I are deeply troubled by this situation. Don't worry, Judith answered quietly. I'll be fine. No, you're not fine, Michael said as he entered the room. He had changed from yesterday's suit into casual jeans and a shirt. You've been seriously injured and betrayed by your family. You shouldn't call that a fine. Michael. Barbara seemed to notice something in her nephew's expression. I'm a lawyer specializing in traffic accidents, Michael said, coming closer to Judith. Please let me handle your lawsuit free of charge. This wasn't just an accident, but a hit and run with attempted evidence concealment. As Judith was about to speak, noisy voices came from the hallway. Martha and Harold Walker were trying to enter the room. Let me see my daughter. Martha's voice echoed. She's currently with visitors, Becky's voice countered. Barbara stood up and headed for the door. I'll handle this. As she left the room, the argument in the hallway intensified. Michael took Judith's hand and quietly said, don't be afraid. You're not alone anymore. When Barbara returned, Judith's parents followed behind her. Both looked exhausted, especially Martha with her red, swollen eyes. 5 minutes only, Barbara said coldly. Any longer would be detrimental to the patient's condition. Michael glanced at Judith, and when she nodded slightly, he left the room with Barbara. A heavy silence filled the room. Harold looked toward the window, seemingly searching for words. Martha clutched a handkerchief with trembling hands. Judith. Martha finally spoke. We only saw Lauren, we truly apologize for hurting you. Those were words Judith had longed to hear for years. But now, hearing them left only emptiness in her heart. Why? Judith quietly asked. Why always my sister over me? We were wrong, Harold turned back, speaking in an unusually weak voice. We were terrible parents. We took your strength for granted and dismissed your needs as weakness. Was Lauren arrested? Judith changed the subject. Martha wiped her tears. Yes, we paid bail last night, but the situation is serious. She's confessed everything. I see, Judith said flatly. We must admit our involvement, Harold continued painfully. Lauren called us right after the accident, we tried to protect her. I took the car to the repair shop. Judith closed her eyes. She didn't want to hear any more. For years, she had worked hard seeking her parents' love. And now she learned the truth, they had prioritized her sister over her very life. Time's up, Becky said, opening the door. Martha stood up and tried to touch Judith's hand, but she pulled away. "Judith, will you ever forgive us? I've spent years trying to earn your love, but I'm tired now," Judith quietly replied. "Forgiveness will take time." After her parents left, Judith stared out the window and cried. These weren't tears of sadness, but the release of emotions suppressed for years. Days later, Michael visited with legal documents. "Everything's ready," he explained carefully. "We can sue not only Lauren but also your parents as accomplices. There's evidence they helped conceal evidence." Judith looked at the documents, deep in thought. "Suing my family. They abandoned you," Michael said gently but firmly. "This is a matter of justice, Judith." That night, Judith made her decision. The next morning, she called Michael to proceed with the lawsuit. "I'll do what's right," she said. "Even if it's painful." Weeks passed, and Judith's recovery progressed better than expected. Michael visited her daily, sometimes bringing his laptop to help her work on manuscripts. His kindness and thoughtfulness gradually opened her heart. "You're a truly strong woman," Michael said one day, sitting by her bedside. "I'm impressed by how you maintain your dignity through all this." Judith showed a genuine smile for the first time in a while. "I had no choice but to be strong." Before the trial began, Bradley visited Judith's hospital room. He said he had broken the engagement and completely cut ties with Lauren. "I share responsibility for not seeing her true nature," he said quietly. "But I want to make amends in a different way. I'm establishing a law firm to support victims of domestic violence and family abuse." "That's wonderful," Judith smiled. "Your kindness hasn't changed." 6 weeks later, Judith was discharged. She still needed a cane but could stand on her own feet. Michael drove her to her apartment, where many flowers had already been arranged. "They're from your publishing colleagues," Michael explained with a smile. "They can't wait for your return." Judith felt relief being back home. But at the same time, she felt anxious about the long road ahead. "Michael," she asked, "what happens now?" "We take it one step at a time," he took her hand. "And I'll always be by your side." Outside the window, spring winds announced a new season. For the first time in her life, Judith felt she might truly become free to walk her own path without seeking her parents' approval or hiding in her sister's shadow. "A new beginning," Judith said quietly. "Yes," Michael smiled. "And it's going to be beautiful." 1 year later, Judith could walk without a cane, though she still had a slight limp. Her position at Truth Publishing had been promoted to associate editor-in-chief, and her book, Broken Bonds: Redefining Family, had become a national bestseller. The book, based on her own experience of twisted family love and regeneration, resonated with many people. She appeared on talk shows, sharing her story and giving courage to those in similar situations. "Ready?" Michael Harrison asked Judith, who was waiting on a bench. In his hand was a small velvet box. "I'm a little nervous," Judith smiled. But in a good way. Their relationship had deepened over the year. Michael had handled her lawsuit, resulting in a suspended sentence and community service for Lauren. Martha and Harold were fined and ordered to perform community service as accomplices. After the trial, Judith's parents sincerely reflected and began volunteering with a support group for traffic accident victims. Healing the relationship took time, but Judith now had dinner with her parents once a month. "Forgiving is different from forgetting," Judith had once told Michael. "But by forgiving, I learned how to move forward myself." Under the cherry blossoms in the park, Michael knelt on one knee. "Judith Walker, will you marry me?" Tears welled in Judith's eyes. "Yes, of course." As they embraced, a figure slowly approached from across the park. It was Lauren Walker. She had completed therapy in prison and confronted her actions and the family's dysfunctional relationships. "Judith, Lauren approached tentatively. Congratulations. I didn't mean to intrude, but I saw you both. Judith hesitated for a moment but gently extended her hand. Thank you, Lauren. As part of my rehabilitation program, I've started supporting traffic accident victims, Lauren said quietly. I also read your book. It was wonderful. Michael stood between them and smiled kindly. It's a special day. Shall we walk together, the three of us? The sisters nodded slightly at the suggestion. Complete reconciliation would take time, but it was a first step toward healing. Walking through the park, Judith watched her new engagement ring glisten in the spring sunlight. The old Judith would have sacrificed her own happiness seeking family approval. But she was different now. She knew her worth and understood what true love meant. Sometimes life's worst events bring about the best changes, Judith said quietly, looking up at the sky. Michael squeezed her hand and replied, and that's not an ending, but the beginning of a new story. As cherry blossoms danced in the wind, Judith felt truly free for the first time in her life.